It began with a hinge. Just a hinge. A rusted, squeaking joint on a gate barely 6 inches off alignment. He knew it was loose. Planned to fix it that weekend, maybe when the weather cooled and the paint wasn't still drying on the southern wall. It didn't seem urgent, until the letter arrived, typed, sealed, hand-delivered, stamped and read, notice of violation, property standards enforcement. The wording was sterile, the font clinical. But the tone cut through it all. This was not a request. It was a demand. He owed $125 for a first-time infraction, and was expected to appear before the Homeowners Association's Compliance Committee if he failed to correct the issue within 72 hours. His name was typed incorrectly. His property wasn't even within the official HOA boundary. At first, he crumpled it and threw it in the trash. He'd dealt with worse. He was a veteran, 2 tours, 1 Bronze Star, and more nights than he could count spent listening to enemy chatter through sandcake headphones in a windowless shack. A letter wouldn't shake him, but the letters kept coming. Then came the visits. First it was a warning, a man in an oversized polo shirt standing just off the driveway, reading from a clipboard and filming with his phone. Then a citation for an unauthorized vehicle, parked overnight, his truck, in his own driveway. Then notices accusing his wife Leah of non-compliant landscaping, though she hadn't planted a thing in months. It was as if someone had opened a floodgate, and they were the only ones in the path. They called the HOA office, then the management company. Each time, they were met with the same rehearsed phrases. We understand your concern. And, our records indicate your property is subject to compliance. But when asked for documents, for proof, for anything resembling a legal basis, they were stonewalled. What they didn't know at the time was that Karen, the HOA president, had recently pushed through an annexation rule, barely noticed in a monthly bulletin, allowing the board to reinterpret district inclusion for boundary adjacent homes. It was a power grab, shrouded in procedural language. Their home, once exempt, had been quietly reclassified without a single signature from them, and that was how the war started. It wasn't loud, not at first. It wasn't rifles or raised fists. It was paperwork, drones, and insinuation. It was staged photos of their lawn posted to the neighborhood Facebook page with captions like, "Some people don't care about property values." It was whispers at block parties. Cold shoulders at the mailbox. They were being isolated, pushed, prodded, tested. Then came the night it turned physical. He had been working in the garage. Leah had gone to bring in a package. He heard the commotion before he saw it, boots scuffing concrete, a loud grunt, the crash of something heavy hitting the porch rail. He came running, wrench still in hand, only to see Leah on the ground, clutching her side, her face twisted in pain. Standing over her was Ray Dobbs. Ray had been in the Army too. Discharged dishonorably, though few knew the details. He now worked unofficially as compliance enforcer for the HOA. No uniform. No ID. Just muscle, a sour grin, and a clipboard always tucked under his arm, like a badge. He didn't run. He didn't flee. He just looked at the narrator with something close to pity and said, "She wouldn't get out of the way." And the narrator froze. His hands didn't tighten on the wrench. His mouth didn't open. His feet didn't move. He just stood there, paralyzed by something deeper than rage, something colder. It was the freeze. That old familiar freeze. The one he thought he trained away years ago. It hit him hard, dredging up every mistake, every failure, every second-guessing breath from his past. The time he'd hesitated on a night patrol, the scream of a friend who didn't make it, the shouting matches of his childhood echoing in his head. The trauma didn't rush in like a storm. It seeped in, silent and suffocating. Ray left. Just walked away. He didn't remember helping Leah up. Just remember the guilt. The shame. The look in her eyes. Confusion, pain, maybe even fear. That night, they didn't sleep. She iced her ribs. He stared at the ceiling, wondering when he had lost his edge. But guilt, when faced honestly, can be a forge. Over the next week, he changed. Not all at once. Not with grand gestures. But with methodical clarity. He called Walt, the neighbor no one really talked to. The one with security cameras on every corner of his roof and solar panels shaped like camouflage netting. Walt didn't ask questions. Just said, "It's about time." They installed motion sensors first, then hidden cameras, IR beams, pressure plates along the fence line. Leah didn't protest. She moved quietly through the house, avoiding the front windows, clutching a coffee mug with both hands even when it was empty. But he could tell, she trusted what he was doing. Karen's tactics escalated. Ray came back, this time with 2 others. They posted laminated citations to the garage. Karen called them enhanced compliance notices. When they were removed, she posted on the HOA's website that the homeowner was tampering with official documents. The footage from his cameras caught them entering without consent, throwing a rock into the garden, laughing. He compiled it all. Timestamps, images, sound clips. That's when Mia got involved. Mia was Leah's cousin, a civil rights attorney from Chicago who visited twice a year and never left without debating politics at the dinner table. When she saw the footage, she didn't laugh. She asked for copies. Then she returned with a folder of legal precedents and a plan. They had been violated, legally, physically, psychologically. The HOA wasn't just annoying. It had become predatory. Together, they filed for an injunction. They delivered cease and desist notices. They sent warnings, backed by legal precedent, to the management company, to the HOA board, and to Karen directly. For the first time, silence returned. Karen didn't resign immediately. She fought, posted a heavily edited video of Ray's visit, framing the narrator as the aggressor, claimed the injuries to Leah were unsubstantiated, tried to build a case through online gossip and board meetings stacked with allies, but the video backfired. The real footage, unedited, cold, clear, was entered into court by Mia. Ray's smirk. Leah's scream. The trespass. The smirk again. It didn't take long. The injunction was granted. HOA enforcement authority was suspended. Karen resigned 2 weeks later, and for the first time in nearly a year, they slept through the night. Underscore 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 underscore. The morning after Karen disappeared from public life, the neighborhood felt strangely hollow. Where once she'd held court, her SUV idling conspicuously in the circular driveway, her voice echoing down sidewalks, now there were only empty chairs and quiet lawns. The homeowners association had crumbled like a house of cards in a breeze, but the impact lingered. It was impossible to pretend what had happened hadn't left marks. He, however, found himself restless. The legal injunction sat on the mantel, clean, framed, quiet, but it didn't reassure him. In fact, it felt fragile, as though one misstep might shatter the protection it granted. He told Leah he wanted to get back to normal. That meant planting flowers, repainting trim, letting the dog pee wherever he liked. But beneath their daily routines, he was still on guard. Karen's ouster hadn't shut down the machinery behind her. Board bylaws still existed, filed in dusty binders at the county clerk's office. Compliance templates sat on desktops in the management company's office, unused, but installed. And somewhere out there, her enforcers, Ray Dobbs included, were still walking someone else's line, waiting for the next opportunity. That truth hovered like a shadow. They didn't talk about it. At least, not in front of the kids next door. The kids who had stopped playing tag after the incident, who now pointed and whispered, "That's the man whose wife got hurt." He could hear it if he listened. But he didn't want to listen. Not yet. Underscore 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 underscore. He started with the physical perimeter. The cameras remained, but he refined them, repositioned, calibrated, upgraded. Some were moved behind shrubs to reduce glare. Others were angled outward, covering more of the street. He added a solar-powered viewing tower on the southeast corner of the yard. Not for broadcast. For record. Each image snapped into 3 separate archives, the encrypted drive, the cloud backup, and the hard disk held by Mia in Chicago, but he quickly realized defense wasn't enough. The neighborhood's trust had frayed, and that fragility was his next frontier. He wanted to rebuild not just their safety, but their confidence, in each other, in community, in home. He started with the mailbox. There had once been dozens of similar boxes, clustered at the corner, communal, shared. But after the harassment campaign began, many had disappeared. People had installed lock units at their home entrances or moved up the hill. He replaced his with a satellite-style box, high, visible, transparent. More than practicality, it was symbolic. Openness over secrecy, access over isolation. One afternoon, he found a note in it. Unclaimed. Unstamped. It said, "I remember." He didn't know who left it. He didn't ask, but he felt seen. Underscore 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 underscore. Leah began hosting morning coffee sessions on the front porch. Just chairs, mugs, biscuits, no agenda. He found her there on a brisk Saturday morning when he woke late, the yard calm. A couple from 3 houses down were sipping steaming drinks. A retiree 2 doors over had brought dog treats. They were talking about the local high school team, fall leaf raking, and new recipes. None of it was about bylaws or power. It was community again. Then came the first test. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. Not from the HOA, they had dissolved. Not from management, they had posted signs promising no future involvement. This letter bore the header of a community safety initiative, a nonprofit claiming to work with residents on proactive risk reduction. "We'd like to work with your block," it said. "We can help coordinate security, lighting, neighborhood watch. Absolutely voluntary." He brought it inside and scanned it. The intent was obvious. It was a softer version of Karen's tactics. Same structure, different promise. The tone was polite, almost caring. But the subtext hadn't changed. That someone else could define the community's standards, and that compliance was the only option. He set the letter aside and called Mia. Her voice was immediate. "They're baiting you. Plant donor seeds. And using the same consultants from Karen's HOA training." He paused. "What do we do?" She sighed. "Let's make them work. Invite them to the next community briefing. Without cameras. Just transparency. If they show up, we record it. If not, we press them on grant filings, funding sources." Within a week, the nonprofit sent a roving representative, a woman in a blazer, clipboard in hand, co-founding a cheerful handshake. Leah invited her onto the porch with coffee. He stayed at the edge, watching. They asked if they could present a block safety vision at the next community meeting. Leah said yes. He said nothing. Underscore 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 underscore. The night of the meeting, the garage had been cleaned. Chairs were set up outside. A projector screen hung between 2 trees. Cookies were baked. Drinks chilled. The neighbors came, about 30 of them, some curious, some skeptical, some still smiling. The representative stepped up. She flashed photos of vulnerable entry points, highlighted potential lighting improvements, and offered pricing for patrol packages. Her tone was polished, calm. But he recognized it, not the people's skills, but the structure. Then Mia took the mic. She thanked the rep for coming. Then she asked, "Would you mind sharing your funding sources?" The rep laughed politely. "We're a self-funded volunteer initiative." Mia produced 3 pages of filings, screenshots from the public site, showing grants received from a firm linked to the same HOA consultant network. She asked for clarification. The rep stammered, then deflected. The group murmured. He spoke last. There was once an HOA here that had power. It used that power to divide families, to punish neighbors, to intimidate. It framed compliance as safety. It looked safe. It sounded safe. But it wasn't. He paused. So forgive me if I'm wary. But this isn't about safety. Or service. It's about control. And until that changes, I don't think we should move forward. There was no confrontation. No applause. Just silence. Then, two neighbors nodded. Then another. The representative cleared her throat and excused herself. That was enough. The departure of the non-profit rep didn't mark the end of the threat. It marked a shift. The next day, he found a small flyer taped to a light post near the entrance of the subdivision. It was generic, but with tone beneath the ink. Want safer streets? Don't let a few loud voices stop progress. It didn't name him, but it didn't have to. The message was clear. He was now the face of opposition to order. The irony made him smile, but it also reminded him. The battle had moved from citations and foot patrols to narrative. Karen had used enforcers. These people used implication. Before, she tried to control behavior. Now they were trying to control perception. And perception, when unchecked, was just as dangerous. So he leaned into transparency even harder. The community meetings moved from quiet gatherings to open forums. Every topic, lighting, traffic flow, landscaping, was voted on by those affected. No gatekeeping. No agendas. No executive boards. They posted results in plain sight. They let silence have no corner to grow in. That, he knew, was the only way to inoculate against shadows, keep the lights on. But something deeper was happening too, inside him. His instincts remained sharp. He still checked the perimeter every evening, still kept 3 encrypted copies of every neighborhood interaction involving outside influence. But he no longer watched with fear. He watched with clarity. The difference was profound. Before, he had reacted. Now, he anticipated. That clarity became the foundation of something larger. A group of 5 nearby neighborhoods reached out, each of them dealing with similar post-HOA schemes. Some had splinter boards. Others were being targeted by third-party, civil partnerships, offering community efficiency plans. In every case, it started the same. Soft language, blurry enforcement, unchallenged authority. So he and Mia drafted a toolkit, plain language, step by step. How to recognize behavior-based compliance efforts. How to respond to veiled threats disguised as safety language. How to audit board finances and management contracts. How to build local resilience without centralized authority. They called it the Boundary Manual. Within a month, over 200 downloads came through the encrypted portal. Lawyers reached out. Neighborhood activists did too. Even a former HOA compliance officer anonymously messaged them. I thought we were helping people feel safe. I didn't realize we were just the soft boot. The phrase stuck with him. The soft boot. That was what they were resisting now. Not violence, not trespassing, not even citations. But the suggestion that silence equals agreement. That neatness is law. That your property is not yours unless someone else says so. And more than anything, that discomfort is rebellion. He knew better now. True safety wasn't compliance. It was mutual recognition. It was knowing your neighbor wouldn't call code enforcement just because your kids left bikes out. It was understanding the difference between a stranger and a threat. And it was knowing you could speak up, loudly, if needed, and that someone would stand next to you. Underscore 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 underscore. Leah watched all of it with quiet pride. Her injury had healed, though some movements still drew a wince. But her spirit had hardened into something sharp. She joined the planning committee, not to push ideas, but to protect openness. She had seen what silence allowed once, and she refused to see it again. They became a team, not just as partners, but as civic anchors. Their porch once again hosted coffee and casual chats, but now, sometimes, it also hosted strategy. How to challenge an unexpected zoning letter. How to navigate a suspicious permit denial. How to push back when suggestions came without evidence. They didn't do it with anger. They did it with records. Every time someone said, "You're overreacting," he remembered the first letter. The broken hinge. The way Ray looked down at Leah and said, "She wouldn't get out of the way." That hinge had started everything, but now it was stronger. Reinforced. Repainted. It creaked less. Not because it was perfect, but because it had been made better through failure. Like them. Underscore 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 underscore. Late that fall, he received a letter from the state housing office. They were reviewing HOA reform proposals and wanted to meet. His name had come up. Quietly, off the record. He declined the first invitation. He wasn't a public speaker. He wasn't trying to go national, but then Mia reminded him. You already are. You just haven't said yes yet. So he did. The meeting was small. Lawmakers. Staffers. A few city planners. He didn't bring slides. He didn't wear a suit. He brought the letter. The first one. The one about the hinge. Yellowed. Folded. But real. He held it up. This is how it started, he said. Not with a threat. Not with violence. With a piece of paper that pretended to care about safety, but only wanted control. He paused. You don't fix that with new forms. You fix that with sunlight. When he left, no one clapped. But 2 aides followed him outside and asked for copies of the Boundary Manual. He sent them both, not because he wanted attention, but because he knew what happened when people stopped paying attention. Winter came slowly that year. The trees held their leaves longer than usual, The sky hung gray but never quite threatening snow. He spent more time indoors, not out of fear, but from peace. Leah nested. There was no other word for it. She baked constantly, turned corners of the house into soft, glowing sanctuaries of blankets and cushions. He caught her humming again, and he felt, for the first time in a long time, settled. But settled didn't mean passive. The manual circulated. Quietly, efficiently. He received occasional updates from Mia. 5 more neighborhood groups had adopted it. 2 communities added their own case files. 1 rural township asked for help drafting anti-coercion covenants. It wasn't just about his street anymore. It was about the idea that no one's peace should hinge on someone else's sense of control. Then one afternoon, he got a phone call. It was from a homeowner in another state. An older man, voice trembling. He just had a lien placed on his home over an unapproved holiday decoration. His HOA claimed it violated their seasonal atmosphere guidelines. It wasn't a joke. The man's property was being transferred to receivership. He had 2 weeks. They talked for an hour. He asked for the HOA bylaws. He reviewed the documents. He found 5 separate violations of due process. He connected the man with Mia. 2 days later, the lien was lifted. And in that moment, the arc of everything that had happened came full circle. Because 2 years earlier, he wouldn't have believed he was capable of helping anyone. Not when he frozen. Not when Leah hit the concrete, and he stood there useless, lost in the noise of his own guilt. But he had come back from that, not with violence. Not with revenge, but with clarity. And now he was offering that clarity to others. The man sent a letter weeks later. A real one. Handwritten. You didn't just save my house. It read. You gave me back my voice. That letter went next to the injunction on the mantle. Underscore 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 spring came again. The wind returned with a softer touch. Children played again, this time without the hush of fearful parents. The porch remained a gathering place, biscuits and strategy. And one afternoon, Walt leaned over and asked, "You ever think about running for city council?" He laughed, but then he stopped laughing. Because it wasn't about power anymore. It was about keeping the lights on. He didn't decide right away. But that evening, Leah surprised him with a wrapped box. Inside was a metal plaque, engraved simply, "We stay ready." He hung it above the workbench, because they were ready now, not for a war, but for erosion. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that arrives in clipboards and clip art and kindly worded lies. But now they knew better. Now they had their roots in place, and nothing, not a hinge, not a letter, not a storm of soft-voiced threats, could move them again. The year after the court injunction against the HOA was quieter, but never silent. He could still feel the pressure in the walls of the house. The way it settled into corners, like moisture after a flood. The garden grew back, the grass greened, and the neighbors opened their blinds again. Yet something in him remained taut, like a coiled spring, not from fear, but from awareness. The kind that stays with you after you've seen just how far power can stretch when left unchecked. Karen was gone, and with her went the banners of community safety and compliance patrols. But the hole she left behind wasn't empty. It became a vacuum, one filled by whispers, rewrites, and uneasy truths. Not everyone agreed on what had happened. Some still believed the HOA was justified, that the enforcement measures were necessary. Others saw the truth, but didn't want to admit how close they'd come to being part of the abuse themselves. He no longer tried to correct them. People see what they're willing to carry. But he remembered it all. The fake citations, the cameras, the assault, the freeze. The way he had failed Leah when she needed him most. That failure still woke him at night. Not as a scream or a flashback, but as a question. What if it happens again? He spent the following months doing more than healing. He built something. A system. Not just for his home, but for others. Walt had helped him create the foundation. Wired motion detectors, perimeter logs, encrypted footage backups. But now he expanded it. Trip wires that alerted phones. Solar-powered surveillance towers with thermal imaging, emergency protocols shared among a small group of trusted neighbors. It wasn't paranoia. It was readiness. It was a blueprint for what to do if the system ever turned against them again. And it wasn't just physical defense. It was informational. He worked with Mia and a few of her legal contacts to create a database, quietly, securely. They called it Neighborhood Integrity Watch, a play on the signs HOAs often posted. But this wasn't about enforcing rules. It was about tracking those who weaponized them. They logged complaints from homeowners across the state, gathering patterns. Citations issued without documentation, enforcement by unlicensed individuals, board meetings held in secret. It became a map of corruption, a web of little Karens spreading across cul-de-sacs and gated communities. Each entry made the story feel less like a fluke and more like a system. And with each entry, he felt a little less alone. But peace has a way of stirring its own predators. Late one evening, he spotted an unfamiliar SUV parked 2 houses down. It sat there for nearly an hour. No lights. No movement. Just idling. He logged the time, took photos, and checked the footage later. The plates were temporary, the vehicle registered to a commercial property manager who had recently bid on several vacant homes in the area. Homes once under the control of the old HOA. It wasn't illegal. But it was a signal. A week later, a letter arrived. It wasn't from an HOA. It was from a Community Standards Task Force, offering assistance in neighborhood safety planning. The letter was vague, filled with buzzwords about cohesion, harmony, and shared values. It read more like a sales pitch than a threat, until he found the footnote. Participation may reduce future compliance obligations. He laughed bitterly. They changed the name. But not the game. He brought it to Mia. She raised an eyebrow. It's a soft re-entry. They're testing the waters. Should we stop them? He asked. She shook her head. Not yet. Let them try. We've got teeth now. That became their strategy. They didn't fight every shadow. They let some of them step fully into the light. And when they did, when the tactics turned from vague suggestions to real pressure, they struck. Legal letters. FOIA requests. County oversight hearings. They used the law like a scalpel, carving away the rot before it could fester. Through it all, Leah grew stronger too. She took a self-defense class. Planted new flower beds. Painted the porch herself. There were still moments when she flinched at loud voices or sudden movement, but they were fewer now. And one morning, after a particularly peaceful breakfast, she looked up at him and said, "You don't carry it the same way anymore." He didn't ask what she meant. He knew. The weight had shifted. It hadn't disappeared. But now he carried it like a pack he'd chosen, not one thrown on him by others. The strategy was simple now. Visibility. Not just his own, but the visibility of truth. The more opaque the tactics of control became, vague notices, undefined rules, off-the-record discussions, the more he responded with transparency. The Neighborhood Integrity Watch site expanded its reach to 3 more counties. A local journalist picked up the story, initially skeptical, but changed her tune after attending a council meeting where 4 homeowners testified about being fined for non-participation in block events. There were no bylaws supporting it. Just pressure, and pressure, unchecked, becomes policy. They compiled incident reports into monthly briefs. He helped review them late at night, cross-referencing names, dates, and enforcement language. The same phrases kept showing up across different towns, different HOAs. Shared safety clause, visual harmony standards, community trust zone. These weren't written by suburban volunteers. They were manufactured, probably by consultants, lawyers, and firms selling plug-and-play governance kits to neighborhood boards. IT was bureaucracy as a product. Oppression disguised as management. He brought this theory to Mia, who confirmed it. There were consulting firms quietly offering homeowner compliance frameworks to HOAs and developers. These frameworks included everything from enforcement pathways to social engagement metrics. It was chillingly corporate. And it explained everything. How Karen had become emboldened, how her enforcement tactics had appeared so rehearsed. She had been following a playbook. They got a copy. A whistleblower from one of the firms sent a draft compliance guide titled Community Order Protocols, a unified governance model for private neighborhoods. It was 87 pages of thinly veiled authoritarianism dressed up as suburban civility. Penalty escalation trees. Social isolation charts. Templates for fake community tribunals. One section included the exact language Karen had once used when accusing Leah of landscape deviation. He read the guide 3 times, each more slowly than the last. It wasn't just HOA creep. It was a philosophy. One that framed freedom as disorder and dissent as instability. This wasn't about the fence hinge anymore. This was about ideology. And now he understood what had really happened, not just to him, but to every neighbor who had paid a fine out of fear, everyone who had apologized when they did nothing wrong. They'd been subjected to a trial version of behavioral control, a test market for quiet submission, and he had disrupted it. That night, he wrote an open letter. Not to the HOA, it no longer existed, but to his neighbors. It was personal, direct, free of legal jargon. He didn't name names or reference legal battles. He talked about boundaries, and about how some things aren't enforced with guns or gates, but with silence and suggestion. He told them what he'd learned, what they'd stopped, and what they had to watch for in the future. They posted it on the new community board, now run by a volunteer panel with no power to fine, no authority to intimidate. The post got more comments than anything else that year. Most were simple. "Thank you. I didn't know. We saw it too." The street felt different after that. Like it had rerouted itself. Not into uniformity, but into awareness. No one feared having the wrong kind of curtain anymore. People parked their trucks a little more crooked. They let their dogs bark a little longer before calling them in. It wasn't chaos. It was humanity. He and Leah took a trip. Just 2 nights, a cabin outside the city, no Wi-Fi, just books and forest. It was the first time since the incident that they'd left the house together without double-checking the locks or the perimeter alerts. And when they came back, the house was just as they'd left it. No citations. No papers taped to the garage. Just a quiet porch, the tree out front casting a strong shadow in the afternoon light. Walt came over that weekend with a thermos of coffee and a hard drive. "They're resurfacing in the next town over," he said. "Same playbook. Different names." He looked at the drive and nodded. "We'll burn them down the same way." Walt smiled. "With paperwork?" He smirked. "With sunlight." Sunlight, it turned out, was more powerful than any fence or firearm he'd ever installed. It didn't stop people from acting out of greed or control, but it made it harder for them to hide. That was enough. He wasn't chasing perfection anymore, just protection. Not with weapons, but with words. Not with intimidation, but with clarity. The next town over, where the same pattern began to unfold, arbitrary violations, aggressive letters, sudden threats of property liens, fought back faster than his neighborhood ever had. One resident there, a retired prosecutor, had read the open letter he wrote. He recognized the signs early. Within a month, a watchdog group had formed. Within 3, the so-called enforcement team disbanded. That was the new playbook. Expose early, organize quietly, resist collectively. Back at home, life stabilized. Leah finished painting the nursery. They were expecting a girl. He hadn't imagined bringing a child into this world back when the house had been a fortress. But now, with the neighborhood steady, and the air no longer thick with tension, it felt possible. He found himself daydreaming about showing her how to tend a garden, how to swing a hammer, how to question authority without fearing it. He would teach her what no HOA document could ever express. That a house isn't a rulebook. It's a shelter, a boundary, a declaration of self. The fence still stood. Not new, but not broken either. He repaired the hinge months ago, not because of the citation, but because it was time. Sometimes things need fixing. Sometimes, they just need leaving alone. He had become a quiet presence in the broader community network now. People emailed, called, passed him tips. He didn't look for trouble, but when it appeared, he knew how to see it for what it was. Not chaos. Not fear, just power misused, and it wasn't just him anymore. Mia had become a recognized voice on HOA reform. Walt had co-authored a citizen's guide for neighborhood self-governance, part technical manual, part memoir. Even some former board members, those who had once stood by Karen, either out of fear or ignorance, had joined advocacy calls and admitted their failure to act. There was healing in that too, but the truest closure came on a morning almost exactly 2 years after the first citation. He stood on the porch, coffee in hand, as the sun broke over the rooftops. A bird landed on the fence. A delivery truck rumbled by. 2 kids passed on bikes, one of them laughing, the other shouting something about a science project. The kind of normal, unstaged moment that, for a time, had felt impossible. Leah stepped outside, a blanket draped around her shoulders. She stood beside him without speaking. He glanced over. You ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't stopped him? She looked at him, calm. I try not to. He nodded. Me too. And then, as if letting go of something final, he said, but I'm glad I didn't freeze the second time. She smiled, eyes soft. You didn't freeze. You woke up. He didn't reply. He didn't need to, because this was the legacy, not the legal battles, not the reforms, not even the network. It was this moment. This quiet. This peace earned through fire, through failure, through learning how to stand again, not out of anger, but from resolve. He watched the sun climb higher. Watched the shadows shift, and for the first time since the war, since the freeze, since the knock on the door that started it all, he felt safe, not because nothing could happen, but because he knew what to do when it did.